We are on.
So welcome everybody to the first ever New Hampshire Network Fall Summit. I'd like you all to note that this meeting is being recorded, but we are so happy that you have joined us this morning. It's such a great turnout for our first thing on a Saturday morning. I'm going to begin with a land acknowledgement from the Kawasuk Band of the Pennacook Abenaki people. This meeting takes place online in New Hampshire, which is located within Endakina, the traditional ancestral homeland and waterways of the Abenaki, Pennacook, and Wabanaki peoples, past and present. We acknowledge and honor with gratitude the land and waterways and our ancestors, the Alnobak, who have stewarded Endakina throughout the generations. My name is Jennifer Doobie. I'm climate organizer with 350 New Hampshire. I'll be emceeing today's event with my good friend, Rob Werner, New Hampshire State Director of the League of Conservation Voters. I'd like to ask you all to please rename yourself in your box to include the town in which you reside. And please mute yourselves and choose the speaker view. But we'd also like to learn more about each other and build community, so please introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know what brings you here today and what organizational affiliation that you're a part of. What are you most looking forward to about autumn, which is 4 days away? I know for me, I'm really looking forward to sweater weather. Rob, how about you?
Thanks, Jen. Glad to be here with everyone. Again, my name is Rob Werner. I'm the New Hampshire State Director for the League of Conservation Voters. I also serve on the Concord City Council, and I chair the Concord Energy and Environment Advisory Committee. I want to take a few minutes to sort of set the table a bit for today's conversation. And I guess I look at it in a couple of ways. On the one hand, we know that our world is slipping into ever more danger. I think no more than evidenced by the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report that came out some weeks ago, where it clearly said that this is code red for humanity, and said that the link between human activity, carbon emissions, and global warming, which then spawns extreme weather events, is unequivocal. And they had never used that word unequivocal before. They'd gotten close to it. They had applied it. They had produced a lot of evidence to lead us to believe that that was the case. But the use of this word unequivocal, I think, is obviously a very strong word, but I think very much has merit in this report. So it really spurs us to action. The other thing that is interesting about the IPCC report is, and it is rather long, as you know, but and I have not had the opportunity to read the entire thing myself, but I'm working through it on occasion. But one of the things that they say is that, you know, more than ever before, the science allows us to attribute events in terms of extreme weather, the fires, the hurricanes, the more frequent and powerful storms, the flooding, with increased carbon emissions. And it goes back to this whole unequivocal connection between our activity and how we are changing the climate. So on the one hand, we have a lot of work to do. We are in a dire situation that gets more dire as we move along. And, you know, we should have taken action decades ago. And so we are running out of time. However, in the face of all that, I do believe that there's hope, there's time. We have the power to shape the future. I think we have to acknowledge that there are some things that we can't do anything about. The city of Miami, for example, in 20 years, it's going to be quite a different place than it is now. And frankly, there's not a lot we can do about that in terms of sea level rise. But we can take action today in our local communities, in our state, nationally, globally, to mitigate the worst impacts of climate change. So I would urge us to get to that. I see hopeful signs. We have an administration in Washington that is taking this seriously, unlike the vacation that occurred over the previous 4 years, previous to January, on this issue. We've re-entered the climate agreement, the Paris Climate Agreement. I think it's very important in terms of what's going on in Congress now for both the infrastructure bill and the reconciliation Build Back Better budget package, which we expect Congress hopefully will pass by October and get to the president's desk by that time. But it's critically important, I think, that the United States act legislatively, make policy, put policy in place prior to us traveling to Glasgow in November for the COP26 summit, which I, travel willing, will be attending. But it's very important to have something to bring to that conference real, that we are serious about making progress. So I'm very hopeful that we can do that. Our congressional delegation here in New Hampshire has continues to be very supportive. They can always use your bolstering, your encouragement to be ambitious as they possibly can in these next number of weeks as these bills make it through the House and the Senate, and then hopefully on to the president's desk. Another example, quick example, is offshore wind. Jennifer is going to be talking about that in more detail, but you know, the Biden administration has made a very serious commitment to offshore wind resources up and down the East Coast, West Coast, and possibly even the Gulf Coast. It is the biggest lever we have, I believe, to reduce fossil fuel use and electrify all that we need to. And it will create jobs and economic opportunity. I think it's really incumbent upon us when we talk about climate action to do it in a way that is hopeful, aspirational, and that we can solve these problems. We can avoid the worst impacts of climate change by taking the ambitious action we need to take, but also at the same time creating economic opportunity and jobs. And that is a winning equation, both on the policy aspects and certainly politically. So I'm glad to be with you all today. I'm looking forward to the discussion. I'm going to turn it back over to Jennifer to talk about some more specific New Hampshire aspects, but I wanted to set sort of a national and perhaps even international context for our work today. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. So we know that New Hampshire really doesn't have a plan to address the climate crisis. All around us, US Climate Alliance states are committed to taking real, impactful, on-the-ground action that urgently addresses the climate challenge. But New Hampshire continues to burn coal instead of investing in clean, renewable sources of energy. The Merrimack Generating Station, located on the Merrimack River right in Bow, is the last remaining coal plant in New England without a shutdown date. We know we have the power to shut down the toxic coal plant and to build offshore wind, but we must turn up the pressure. So Governor Sununu took the first step on offshore wind in 2019, but now he's dragging his feet, and New Hampshire is being left behind again when it comes to wind energy. The New Hampshire Senate killed the offshore wind bill this past legislative session, and the Offshore Wind Task Force for the Gulf of Maine has been slow to take action. So Governor Sununu really needs to make offshore wind a priority so that we can take care of New Hampshire workers and stop relying on fossil fuels. Our congressional delegation are about to vote on a bold budget reconciliation bill that includes investments in renewable energy and climate resiliency, and we need them to vote yes. So as powerful corporations attempt to weaken the budget reconciliation bill with fear and disinformation, we are calling for a $3.5 trillion package that invests in the people's priorities with no cuts. It's an all hands on deck moment for all of us here in New Hampshire. We need to keep the pressure on as we move forward, making sure that our federal legislation know that we need them to act now. So Rob, I'll pass it back over to you.
Thanks. So I'm gonna do a quick agenda overview and then pass that over to Joe Kwasnik for the next session. Joe will lead a discussion for our organization update, where we've been, introduce the management team, talk about some of the network achievements. We're then going to hear from Maine State Representative Lydia Blume, and we're hoping to hear from her. We will hear from her in terms of why has Maine been successful and what are the kind of lessons that we might be able to learn from Maine. She's going to be speaking for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll take some questions. We'll then move into a panel discussion with Don Kreese, Bob Backus, and Representative Kat McGee, and they'll reflect a bit on what Representative Blume has said and then what that means for us, and then what sort of a look ahead in terms of our legislative session next year and perhaps beyond in terms of how we can best organize ourselves. We'll have a coffee break. We'll then, after we come back from the coffee break, Reinmar and Bruce will lead us into breakout rooms. You'll have just an opportunity to talk about particular issues. What are the main needs and opportunities? How can groups and individuals collaborate to increase our impact? We'll then I'll come back into a large session and report out a bit in terms of what people had to say and what this discussion was about. Wrap up, we have an action item. We'd like attendees to fill out a form, an interest form in terms of our working groups. And we'll be talking about some upcoming events and actions, and then we'll send you on your way. This session is being recorded, so if you want to revisit anything that's said during the day, you'll have an ability to do that. And perhaps folks who were not able to join us today will also have access to that. And then around 12:45 or so, our time together today will conclude. So thanks again for being here with us and taking the time on this Saturday morning. I'm going to turn it over to our friend Joe Kwasnik.
Thanks, Rob. Jennifer, appreciate it very much. My name is Joe Kwasnik, and who am I? I'm one of the original founders of the network with other folks, and I've also been a co-convener with Donna Reardon on the Kent Street Coalition Environment, Energy, and Climate Change Work Group. So good morning and welcome to this fall summit of the New Hampshire Network. Today, as Rob was saying, you'll hear from a variety of voices on the possibilities for New Hampshire in these areas. You will also hear from a legislator from our neighboring state of Maine, which emerged in the last few years from a regressive governor to an administration that is looking forward to solving the challenges facing their environment, energy, and climate futures. In addition, we will hear the opinions of legislator and consumer advocacy leaders on the challenges facing New Hampshire and some possible paths moving forward. And finally, you will all be offered the chance to provide advice and direction to the New Hampshire Network through, as Rob said, small focus groups on what we need to do to make a difference in New Hampshire. Before we do that, I want to go back in time to last December when Donna Reardon, Susan Richmond, and I, working with the Kent Street Environment, Energy, and Climate Work Group, were challenged to reach out to other like-minded groups in New Hampshire. Responding to that challenge, we put in place in January of this past year the Google Group with an open invitation to individuals and environment, energy, and climate groups within New Hampshire to join us in communications and coordination on issues of environment, energy, and climate. We're all hopeful that the New Hampshire Network will make a difference. Today, I'm really proud to present our newly elected and our first management team of the New Hampshire Network. As a result of elections carried out over the last 10 days, we're proud to announce that we now have a managing team for the New Hampshire Network. They are Jennifer Doobie, Reinmar Seidler, and Rick Maynard. So would you all stand up and take a bow? No, just kidding. But congratulations to those three. Looking forward to some really incredible work and some great leadership for our network going forward. What they'll be doing initially is taking the next steps for the New Hampshire Network, including managing the day-to-day operations of the network, developing policy and procedures, and mapping out our next steps in moving forward and serving the needs of our members. Now I'd like to move on. What have we done in the last 9 months? Well, a fairly considerable amount of activities and accomplishments. Just a few that I'll mention. One is that we actually established the New Hampshire Network Google Group and Slack channel, We now have about 80 members, interested people within New Hampshire that are interested in environment, climate, and energy. And all these folks are actively working with us to try to move that agenda forward. We also, over the last 9 months, conducted 3 workshops, an organizing outreach workshop with Reverend John Stanley and Nate Tim. We did a framing workshop with Kat McGee and others, and a workshop on climate change with Dan Weeks. Those were all very successful and well attended. We've also provided consistent and persuasive testimony on these issues in the New Hampshire legislature. We think it made a difference. We supported the climate change lobby's carbon fee and dividend program in the U.S. House and Senate, supported the amendments to the important House Bill 315, Community Power, which the governor signed last week, which allows communities within New Hampshire to put in place renewable energy sources up to 5 megawatts. That's an incredible accomplishment from those folks who actually amended that House bill. And we also developed comments on the 10-year New Hampshire energy plan. We're hoping they were taken. We'll hope there'll be some changes there, but we're just hoping. And lastly, thanks to Bruce Burke, we provide a weekly summary of happenings within New Hampshire on these particular issues. So make sure you get online and listen to all those summaries that come forth. They're very, very interesting and important of what's going on in the world. Certainly impressive accomplishments for a young organization. I'd like to now focus on 3 areas that I think are certainly developed or in development for the network. One will be talking about our network website. One will be talking about our network plastics work group, and the other will be our legislative work group. So I'd like to this time turn it over to John Gage and talk about our network website. John, it's up to you.
Thank you very much, Joe. Okay, that's better. So in order to communicate, simply and clearly across a lot of different groups, we created this website to give current updates about legislative things and then deeper information and help manage the subcommittees that are working on various projects. So this is newhampshirenetwork.org, and the homepage describes our vision, mission, and values. And below that are the active projects. And so the legislative work group is going to be kicking off its meeting, as Joe said, this week. And there's also the plastic working group, which is meeting tomorrow. So they're going to speak shortly, so I won't go into more detail about those, but you can click on here and find out more detail and accomplishments. There's also an About Us page, which is a list of the organizations that have joined the network publicly. And so we encourage new organizations that are not on this list to click the button here, add your organization to the New Hampshire network. And we'll put up your logo and a short description. And we're hoping to see this list grow significantly after this meeting. Okay, so there's also a Join Us page for individuals. There's 2 ways you can get connected. One is to join the Google group, so you get connected to emails about what's going on in the network. And there's also a Slack channel, so you can join Slack. And this is another way for organizations to get put on the organization list also. And finally, we have news and events. So for events, these are the big network events. So summits and things like that will appear here. And as Joe mentioned, weekly updates and meeting minutes are provided in our news section. And this is where right now you can find timely updates about what's happening. And as the legislative session gets started, this website will be a good place to go to find out what hearings are coming up and what talking points we suggest people consider making. Okay, with that, I will turn this back to Joe.
Thanks, John. Well, I'd like to now call on Susan Richmond to talk about our network plastics work group. Susan?
Okay, so I'm here. Cindy Heath is the real leader of the group. We will have our fourth meeting on Sunday. So I should let you know at the end of today's summit, there'll be a form for you to fill out if you want to be put on the email list, or if you want to be on the legislative or the plastics working group. If you do that, you'll get the Zoom link for the plastics meeting tomorrow or the legislative work group meeting on Tuesday. So just really quickly, plastics realizes, fossil fuels in general is realizing that renewables is getting a larger market share of the fuel business. So they're ramping up plastics, and it's ramping up appallingly. By 2050, the amount of plastics in the ocean should exceed, in terms of weight, the weight of fish, that we are all currently having about a credit card's worth of plastic into our system every week. Plastics, little microbits, are being found in our embryos, in our babies when they're born. So it's reaching the entire spectrum of life on Earth. So, and we have a legislation in Washington, there's the Break Free from Plastics Act, but the plate is so full in Washington, not looking super hopeful. And members of the New Hampshire Plastics Working Group actually went to talk to Annie Custer to try and get her endorsement. And there's some big plastic manufacturing in the North Country, so she really didn't want to go there. And as you know, the New Hampshire legislature has not voted in favor of any reduction of plastic, including all the plastic bags that Maine does not allow their grocery stores to hand out for free. So our action now is to be on the local level. I'm showing you the slide pack that Cindy Heath put together. And here is the table of contents. You will see how phenomenal this resource is that she's put together. The first job that the group has done has been to research what other programs are being done throughout the world, throughout the country, and throughout New Hampshire. And our group itself has members from over 12 towns and an equal number of organizations. But so in terms of what can we usefully do, given that the legislature is blocking us, is to start locally. And so one of our key initiatives is 10 towns, 10 volunteers, 10 actions. This is based on what is happening in Dover, and shout out to Chris Baber, who's here, and some other Dover friends who have been working on what can happen in a town when the legislature won't let you set your own regulations. How can you do, what other kinds of activities? And you can just see here on our 10 towns that Hopkinton is doing work, and we're just getting ideas from across the state. Finally, they have come, community action work, sorry. They have come and talked to us. They have mounted successful campaigns such as the Lebanon Pipeline, Dartmouth Biomass, North Country Landfill, New Hampshire Water Protections, Climate Justice. They know how to get us together with other people, with resources, how to focus our action. So we're also seeking for help from them. So given that we've only had 3 meetings, this is a really vigorous group. So I would ask that if you are interested, just sign on to the form at the end. And I'm now going to cede my remaining seconds to John Gage, who's going to talk about this moment in climate history. So John, your turn.
Yeah, got the mute. Okay, so right now, there's big potential for federal legislation on climate. And so Citizens Climate Lobby is making a national push to help Congress pass significant legislation in the reconciliation package. We want them to include carbon pricing among the suite of legislation policies that they have in this package. And if you're a leader, a state representative, a business owner, or a community organization leader, please call Senator Hassan and ask her to endorse and support carbon pricing in the reconciliation package. And everyone can tell the president and the our 2 senators that they would like them to support carbon pricing in this reconciliation package. So we can do this if enough people show support for this. And economists say this carbon pricing is the most powerful lever we have to rapidly reduce climate pollution. So we need to do lots of other things, but the IPCC says we won't achieve our climate objectives if we don't price carbon. So appreciate your help with this. Thank you.
Okay, John, thank you very much. Thank you, Susan. I'd like to now just talk a little bit about the New Hampshire Network Legislative Work Group. This work group will be meeting, an organizational meeting will occur on Tuesday, September 21st. I think everyone in the network has been invited, so looking forward to have people join us on the 21st. That meeting will start the organizing of the work group and sharpening our focus and scope of the oversight of the legislative process. Likely will be an active submitter of testimony and proposed environmental, energy, and climate legislation this session in the New Hampshire legislature. And we're also going to be watching and commenting on regulatory proposals within the Sununu administration. Very important for us to look at both legislative and regulatory developments in the state. And we're hoping that our testimony and our comments on legislation and regulatory development will be important to actually move the needle here in New Hampshire to the areas we really need to move into, be it energy efficiency, clean energy, carbon reduction, and also, importantly, plastics, which is what Susan just talked about. So we welcome any member to participate. Please show up on Tuesday and help us work through how the team will be organized, who will take on responsibilities for various areas of focus, and be able to be ready when the legislature starts its hearings in January. So we appreciate that very much. We hope we'll see a robust turnout, and everyone is welcome. Thank you. So at this time, I'd like to turn the podium over to Jennifer and Rob.
Thanks, Joe. Well, it appears we're ahead of schedule, which is always amazing. We have the pleasure today of being joined by Maine State Representative Lydia Blume, who I mentioned before is going to provide some perspective on what's going on in Maine. And of course, we would like to replicate what has happened in Maine. We want to join our neighbors to the east in their good work and their ambition. So I'm going to take a few minutes to introduce Representative Blume. But first I wanted to ask, Representative, have you been made a host for your slides, or are you going to share your screen? I think John Gage might have made you a host. Representative Blume is in her 4th term in the Maine House of Representatives. She represents the town of York, a town which many of us no doubt enjoy. Serves on the legislature's Joint Standing Committee on Marine Resources and the Joint Standing Committee on the Environment and Natural Resources. Representative Blume is an appointed member of the Maine Climate Council and chair of the legislature's bipartisan Coastal and Climate Action Caucus. She's a graduate of Boston University in geography. That means something to me because my spouse is a BU alum, by the way. And lives in Cape Nettic with her daughter. So thanks again, Representative Blume, for joining us here this morning, and thanks for taking the time.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, Rob. It's such a pleasure to be here with New Hampshire, because we are neighbors and we're close, and I'm close neighbors with you. And you have been an inspiration, believe it or not. We were emulating New Hampshire when we began this process for the Maine Climate Council. And the reason is because of your coastal hazards and risk legislation that was ahead of the time. And I hope that, I don't know what's happening with it now, but I hope it's been updated, because it was a really good report. And it spurred me on to push for sea level rise legislation in Maine. And that was 7 years ago. It took a long time to finally get to this point where we are now. So keep up the good work. So so we have produced a 4-year climate action plan. It's called Maine Won't Wait. It was produced in December 2020, after a very long time, a very long year with COVID and meeting, but with a highly motivated individuals, just like you guys are. So the Maine Climate Council was a bill that was sponsored by a Republican, Senator David Woodson, and it enjoyed broad bipartisan support when it was assigned in June of 2019. And, you know, it really was because we had a governor who has absolutely put it at the forefront. When she did her speech, she mentioned climate change right off the bat. And, you know, we have a majority in the House and the Senate, a very slight majority, but we have a majority. And that kind of momentum has brought this forward. We put in state law our climate goals to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions, to achieve carbon neutrality, to advance equity through this whole thing. We've been talking about equity from the beginning through Maine's climate response. And then we also are talking about how we can be more resilient to the ongoing impacts of climate change, the things that we cannot stop. And we've got, you know, compared to New Hampshire, we've got 3,500 miles of coastline as opposed to the 13 and 18, excuse me. And it's it's extremely important. Our marine systems and our coastline is absolutely a driver of economic activity. And that's the other aspect to this that was always clear, is that this is about good jobs, clean jobs, and creating more jobs for the state of Maine. And we figured out, you know, we had lots of different reports. We figured out where our greenhouse gas emissions were coming from. Most of it is transportation. And I don't know if that's the same for New Hampshire, but it was very interesting to see 54% of our emissions are from transportation. And that's the real challenge in Maine, is how do we do that? And we're going to be doing that through electrification, of course. We are already reducing the greenhouse gas emissions. We're on our way to 80%. So we're below 1990 levels. And that's what our goals are based on. So the Climate Council that was created by this legislature was basically 39 members with scientists and people from different industries and state and local officials. And they are responsible for developing the climate action plan. What we learned actually from New Hampshire, and something that I was pushing for in the beginning of this, is that we needed a scientific and technical subcommittee that would decide, that would work on the science and how climate change was affecting Maine scientifically. And that would inform the 6 working groups that were put into place. This science and technical subcommittee produced a 350-page report that actually decided what climate, with all the best knowledge at this point in time, what would be sea level rise, for example, and what we should be preparing for. That has actually now been put into statute. It's actually in the process of getting into statute throughout Maine statutes, so we can be prepared for it. This equity subcommittee that's also part of it is now looking at all of the recommendations and seeing if it's meeting equitable standards. I served on the Coastal Marine Working Group, and I'm now serving on the Community Resilience Planning and Public Health and Emergency Management Working Group. But all of these groups, volunteers, as I said, we met throughout the pandemic, came up with recommendations that were put into the final plan. And I've never been with such an inspired group of people. There was such pent-up energy, and I'm sure New Hampshire is going to experience it too. This energy that folks like you have, and then when you're actually able to do something and affect change, it was truly a great experience. And we're very proud of the product that we produced on December 1st, 2020, which was the Climate Action Plan. Very well written. And this, the other thing that new state of Maine did in order to really create this was that Governor Mills started the GOPIF, which is the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. She always said that there should be a future planning in every government. And so anyway, that incredibly talented people were hired, and the dream job of people who've studied climate all their lives, like Dr. Cassandra Rose, and she just has done a terrific job and been one of the stalwarts behind this plan. So, but what's important to know about this plan, and I think is that in statute as well, every 4 years we're going to rewrite this plan, because every 4 years the Science and Technical Subcommittee has to update their work. Things might change with the sea level rise, for example. So it's an ongoing process. It's not just one time. We're still meeting as subcommittees, as working groups, and we're monitoring what's happening in the legislature. And we will know that there'll be more things to identify and more things to work on in these subgroups as for the next climate action plan. These are the 4 reports. We did basically the greenhouse gas modeling and also the cost of doing nothing report, which I think is really important. If we don't do anything, it's going to cost us money. And of course, the scientific assessment of climate change, the equity assessment of the draft strategies by the Mitchell Center, looked at everything that before we published to see what our equity, and made some recommendations. And then the states to the Maine energy plan to bring more work, more jobs to Maine. So that was published December 1st, 2020. It's a wonderful, and you can see it as in a flip book online. As I said, it's really well written, really a good read. I recommend you taking a look. So the climate action strategies, we came up with 8 of them. Embrace the future of transportation in Maine, modernize Maine's buildings. We have a wonderful organization called Efficiency Maine here that is really ready to do all of these energy efficiency work, to be able to be a pass-through for money that comes into the state for energy efficiency. And this has been a very big help that we've already had some of these institutions in place prior to this. And thankfully, we had this climate action plan before the ARPA funding came, so we knew exactly where we wanted to put it in relationship also to our biennial budget. I'm going to focus a little bit so that's sort of the background. We just had a meeting yesterday of the Community Resiliency Planning Public Emergency Management Work Group yesterday. So I'm just wanted to give you the newest information about how we're following, how this is being implemented. The ARPA Rescue Plan Act was able to, this is how we're spending that money. 150 million to expand broadband, energy efficiency programs, energy efficient affordable housing. And this is a big one, $20 million for adaptation and climate resilient local infrastructure, extremely important for shovel-ready projects. 8 million for clean energy partnerships, workforce development, 50 million for innovation of heritage industries, which is extremely important, where our fisheries and our forest products industry, we need to make sure that we are on the cutting edge and we are prepared for what happens with the climate. And then we've got 8 million for municipal and public electric vehicle charging stations, and 5 million for workforce transportation pilot projects. Now this had to be voted in. It was a majority vote to assess this money this way. And this is on top of what the biennial budget, and this is ongoing. This is just from the state, in that we had 40 million for land conservation. We hadn't put land conservation money in for years under LePage. He refused to let that happen. And we have local and regional planning grants to add to that $20 million. And the 3.1 million for studies, research, and staff to support grid modernization and offshore wind. And 3 million to upgrade municipal culverts at stream crossings, which is a very popular and very important program to bring back our fish and to mitigate against the effects of more frequent flooding and storm surge. One of the, and so everything is sort of ongoing at this point, which is great. We've identified there were so many bills that were put in because of this report and from so many different sources. Let me just see if I can. And one of the, some of this money is going to these pilot projects. It's going to help inform how we're going to help our municipalities prepare for climate change, because it's like not every town can afford to have a resilience specialist or a planner. You know, Maine is very home rule driven. So we're trying to encourage more regional groupings. And so there's a pilot project that's dealing with some of coastal communities, inland communities, and one in Aroostook County, very rural. And that's going to help inform how are we going to regionalize, how are we going to, what's going to be best to affect it. I have a bill in actually that was held over to take the results of such a pilot project and try to put it into statute and to rewrite some of our municipality statutes relating and bring climate change into the planning. So some of the initiatives and projects that that Maine Rep has spurred is these. We've got heat pumps. We've set a very ambitious goal of converting to heat pumps throughout the state, and we're on track. I don't know the numbers, but we're on track and this very ambitious goal. It's actually working. The community resilience pilot projects, lead by example, clean transportation roadmap, trying to figure out where we're going to put all of the charging stations and what's that plan going forward. The equity subcommittee, which is extremely important to making sure, and this was written in the law too, that we are having equity throughout, and that's something that I think becomes more and more important. We've got a forest carbon task force. We've got a lot of trees in Maine that are really working for us in terms of becoming carbon neutral, and especially, and also our marshes, which also blue carbon. And I know that New Hampshire is also doing some work on blue carbon. Agricultural solar siting stakeholder group, offshore wind roadmap. We have the best wind in the Gulf of Maine of any place on the East Coast. And we have a lot of people who use the Gulf of Maine. So it's an extremely exciting success that we were able to finally work and finally come to resolution with the lobster industry about siting of our research array for offshore wind that will be about 30 miles offshore. And the reason we're able to do that is because the University of Maine has developed floating offshore wind, and will be one of the first in this country to have floating offshore wind, which is much better for the environment in the sense that you don't have to drill and create all the noise, putting in windmills that are stuck to the bottom, basically anchors, 3 anchors, and it floats. So we can put it in any depth water. It's very exciting. So we have a 16 square mile research array that we've identified the area in the Gulf of Maine, and that is what this offshore wind roadmap. We've got a lot of work to do. What do we need on the coast? What kind of infrastructure do we need in our working waterfronts, for example, to support that? And the Clean Energy Innovation Challenge, I'm not sure exactly what that is, but it probably is exactly what it says it is. So there's, as I said, there was lots of legislation that was put forth. These are all the bills that passed. And it is, again, it was about about energy and mitigation of greenhouse gases, and about resiliency of our towns to the effects of climate change. It really, it's a very, very broad set of bills. And some of the other legislation, well, this is just a little more in details, that we have a sea level rise resolve, which is huge, which is going to be put throughout all of our statutes. So we have, right now, we're saying 1.5 feet by 2050, 4 feet by 2100. That's what we need to prepare for. We've got appliance standards. We passed the commercial property, the CPACE program, the Maine Climate Corps, which is starting to get underway and starting to form. How's that going to go? It reinstituted eelgrass mapping. We did some divestment of fossil fuels. We got the equity and we also passed a green bank initiative, which will be great because it looks like the federal government is trying to do that as well. So we'll have a place for that. And the green bank actually may be done through Efficiency Maine. And then just about doing more in terms of energy. And we've changed our net energy, the solar net energy as well. So that's basically just a brief overview of what we did, how we did it. I'm very proud of the work that we did, and I'm very proud of the state of Maine. I think that we are. I just couldn't stop smiling when this stuff. We had been under such work so hard, just like you guys are working so hard, and we gotta. And what I've learned is that you just gotta keep going, and look for the opportunity, and then bring it all together and be ready for it. And I hope that we can continue on with Janet Mills as our governor, so we can continue this good work. We are really making progress. That's how I feel right now. Thanks.
You've provided a lot of hope.
Yes, hope is what we have. And I'm just can't, as I say, it just astounds me how much we've done.
Well, yes, and thanks. And clearly leadership matters in terms of all of these initiatives that Maine has done. And we certainly have a lot to aspire to. And we need more inspired leadership, that's for sure, at all levels. But what we'd like to do now is take some questions before we turn it over to the panel for Representative Blume. I would ask that you put those questions in the chat, and then we'll pick through them for a little while, maybe about 15 minutes or so, and then we'll turn it over to the panel. But actually, there was a question that I think Ken Wells put in terms of one of the slides, in terms of leading by example. Is there something that you would tag in terms of that part of all the good work?
Yeah, I believe it's about electric vehicles in the state fleet. I think that's one of the things that we're trying to do. And I think that's what it's about, that particular lead by example. And I don't know much more about it, sorry.
We had a question about, we are all certainly, policy and elections certainly go hand in hand. So, and the ability to do things are affected by elections, certainly. So what happens if leadership at the top of Maine in the governor's office changes next year?
Well, this legislation is in statute. So statute would have to change. You'd have to change the law. I mean, right now it has to be redone every 4 years. So hopefully it will continue. What I think that one of the ways that a leadership change would try to influence it is by starving it, and just not funding it or not replacing people, et cetera, et cetera. That's what LePage had done. Just starved the government of any ability to do anything. But we've got a very, as I said, we've got a lot of momentum, a lot of things going, and this ARPA funding and the way that we're distributing it out I think is going to be very powerful and make some really good changes, even if there is a change at the top. But I do hope that this will continue. I just feel like there has been a sea change since we've had LePage in terms of there's just so much more people are accepting it. More towns are accepting it. More towns are doing it. I couldn't even say sea level rise in 2015. You know, I had to say sea level change. So, I mean, there is, I do think that we're growing as a nation and as states. You know, we're part of I think, is New Hampshire part of the compact for the states that were before we entered the Paris Agreement, that said that we would hold true to the Paris Agreement? Is New Hampshire probably isn't one of them.
Are you referring to the We Are Still In initiative?
I think so.
Yeah, a couple of our cities, Concord,
Yeah.
Maine, certainly were. I brought Concord into that organization, but on a state level, we had not joined it. There's a question about involving students, particularly young students, all the way from younger grades up through high school. Is there representation on the Climate Council from students, or how are they involved?
It's written into the legislation that one of the members must be a youth. I guess we call it youth. Yeah. Oh yes, we had very strong representation, and we are also focusing on, you know, climate education. I'm going to have a bill in next term, I hope, about climate education and adding that, and also this Maine Climate Corps, to try to help get people to volunteer to do climate related things like invasive species removal, and other initiatives on the ground. And then, you know, our community colleges and our whole education system, we want to partner so we can train people for these clean energy jobs as well.
That's terrific.
Yeah.
Glad to see that. You had mentioned early on that there was bipartisan support for the development of the Maine Climate Council report. So, you know, we certainly have our struggles here in New Hampshire, maintaining things in a bipartisan manner. Just as a quick illustration of that, there's only one Republican state representative that's in the state legislature at the moment that voted to expand net metering, voted to expand our renewable portfolio standard, and voted to use our RGGI funds more appropriately as our New England neighbors do. That would be Representative Dan Wolf, a good friend of ours on these issues, from Newbury. So that's a challenge, but I'm glad to see that you have hopefully maintained this bipartisan aspect. What motivated, in your view, your friends on the other side of the aisle to collaborate with you and your colleagues?
I think that I just think that it's well, it helps that we did have a majority. We have a majority on the committees as well. Some of these were party line votes, and we had enough to get them through. But there are plenty of Republicans, and I wish that, you know what, I wish I had the numbers, and that's a really good question, because I think it really would to speak to the bipartisan nature. And the bill did pass very nicely with the bill that created the Maine Climate Council. So and I should get those numbers, but I do believe it was up there. I think it was also you know, like a 2/3 vote. So I do think that there is such, you know, that we have all these industries, and we've tied it very closely to economic activity as well. You know, the lobster industry could suffer greatly from ocean acidification, for example, and from warming oceans, and all these things are going to could change our branding, could change Maine as the lobster capital of the world. You know, this is very scary stuff. So doing things on that level, and also in the forest products, and also just the multitude of people that were involved in this, I think it helped a great deal.
Moving to transportation, is Maine, what's going on in Maine in terms of the TCI, the transportation?
Yeah, I think it's still being discussed. And there's just so many, we're such a rural state, and you know, the problem with TCI is how do you make that equitable, you know, in the rural part? And I think it's still an ongoing conversation. So I'm not sure. I haven't heard about it recently, but the last time that I asked about it, there was still nothing definitive, as far as I know.
Okay.
But I should want to check that out anyway.
Sure. We talked about plastics, and we know that there's a significant landmark law that was enacted in Maine. I think the representative that represents Ellsworth, I believe.
Nicole Grahowski, yep.
Yes, up by the national park. Could you tell us a little bit about that? I know that that got some significant national attention.
It did, and it was not the first time that it was put forth. It was put forth the last session, and you know, I think it the session before that. So as I said, sometimes these things take time. That was an incredible piece of negotiation with industry, and but we held our own because the industry saw the writing on the wall and had put forth their own bill that would make it easier for them. And we rejected that, but worked with them. And it really is the first in the nation, but it's certainly not the first in the world. And it's going to take a couple of years to implement, but it is a very strong law. And it should help the real idea here is to help our municipalities that don't do anything with recycling now because of what has happened with recycling, to recycle, to have their programs paid for by industry, and then also just reduce the packaging. And I think it could happen again. I think it could happen across the country. I think didn't Oregon or Washington State pass something too? But that was that got bipartisan support as well.
I think we'll take a couple more questions and then we'll turn it over to our panel. You mentioned Efficiency Maine. We have a program here called New Hampshire Saves, so I'm kind of thinking that's the same, similar type of initiative. We have some real challenges with that at the moment in terms of our energy efficiency funding. But how it seems like a good partnership. How is that going in Maine?
Well, Efficiency Maine, it has nothing to do with the utilities.
Okay.
It's a standalone governmental organization, I guess it is. But what it does is that it just does all the incentivizing for it's a wonderful website, and we've had just only good results from it. People, it's done very well. It's very well run. I mean, I've gotten rebates from it. You know, so it's a very well regarded and well run institution.
Good. One final question for you. I'm pleased if you want to stick around for the rest of the discussion. I think you might find it illuminating too. We're going to certainly be back in touch with you. It's not the last conversation we'll have, I'm sure. But could you tell us a little bit about the Green Accelerator?
Well, it's a green bank. Well, yeah, the legislation actually just allowed for it to be built. I don't think it got funding, but what I understand is on the federal level that there's going to be some kind of green bank federal thing that will work with the state's green banks. Do you understand that as well? I'm not sure if I'm not sure if I.
Yeah, that's my
point is-
general understanding. I have
Yeah.
to say, I don't have a lot of, I haven't had the opportunity to study it very closely, but I think the whole idea of, you know, providing entities for financing. I mean, finance is going to be extremely important. We have all these initiatives, we all these things we really need to do. How are we going to pay for this, and how are we going to pay for it in an equitable manner? So I think that really comes to the fore. And I think Green Bank, I know Connecticut has a green bank that seems to work pretty well, as I understand it.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that we were doing it in
Yeah.
Maine as well. So this is, it's exciting. We'll see, you know, how it's all going to work together. But there's a lot, as you say, there's a lot to know. And I feel bad that I'm not as knowledgeable as I should be. And I thank Tad for saying it's a standalone energy efficiency utility. Thank you for that.
Good. Well, thanks so much for joining us this morning. It was a really wonderful presentation. We have a lot to live up to, that's for sure.
Well, no, it's you're on the right track. Absolutely. And again, remember, it was because there's coastal hazards and risk, you know, that I was able to go forward. It inspired me, and it ultimately became my bill that was kind of based on New Hampshire's bill was subsumed into this climate action plan bill.
Well,
So-
yes, and that commission is alive and well. I actually was with the co-chair yesterday at an event in Seabrook with Congressman Pappas and former Senator Nancy Stiles, and we were talking about the resiliency of the Seabrook wastewater treatment plant and hardening it for the expected sea level rise that is projected. So that's an important venue, that commission, to continue that work.
It was very
Oh,
important.
so-
And you've gone further, I think, with blue carbon initiatives as well. So, I mean, it was a very good thing. And Cameron Wake, who
Yep.
was a scientist on that, he lives in Kittery. So.
Yes, we let him come to New Hampshire on occasion. So, but
He's been a great help. He's been a great help, but he's very involved in Kittery town's work. And I wish you the
Yes.
best with the plastics as well. Did I understand, if you don't mind, I just want to ask one question. Did I understand that the governor, you have a bill that has basically said no towns can initiate their own plastic bag ban? Is that
well,
what-
it's more about how New Hampshire government is structured, because
Oh.
municipalities are essentially creatures of the legislature, meaning we can't enact laws that are beyond state statute. So, you know, this whole
Oh.
aspect of New Hampshire being somewhat of a home rule state is a misnomer, because
Yes.
we have this constraint. So there was legislation to specifically allow municipalities the flexibility to pass things that were more strict than would be on state statute, but that has not been enacted yet.
Well, you know, the reason that we were able to get a statewide plastic bag ban was because so many towns passed their own ordinances that the industry that, you know, came back and said, yeah, we're going to work with you on a statewide bill because we don't want to have to deal with all these different requirements from different towns. So it is a way, it is a strategy to get a statewide law, but it sounds like you don't have that. You have to do it another way.
You don't have that flexibility yet, but we're working on it.
Yeah. Well, good
Thanks
luck.
again. I'm going to have
Yes.
a great rest of the day, and
Thank you.
I'm going to turn it over to Joe Kwasnick.
Thanks, Rob. And an interesting side point about solid waste here in New Hampshire, we're in the process of our state government is evaluating permitting a huge landfill up in Dalton, New Hampshire, on the shores of Forest Lake, up in our North Country, at a point where a location where recreation is very important to the local economy up there. And here we are thinking about siting a landfill. And with New Hampshire having very little in the way of really legislation or regulation in terms of trying to reduce and eliminate waste products going into landfills. So kind of a interesting situation we're in right now. But anyways, let's move on to the panel discussion. This will be a panel discussion which I hope everyone will enjoy. And I will ask that anyone has questions for these panelists, just put it on Zoom, on chat, and we'll be sure to try to get as many of those into the conversation as possible. So today we have with us Kat McGee, a member of the New Hampshire House of Representatives and member of the Science, Technology, and Energy Committee of the House. Kat chaired the Hollis Pipeline Impact Study Task Force for the Hollis Selectmen during the proposed Kinder Morgan Pipeline Project. She also represented the town of Hollis on the Nashua Regional Planning Commission's Energy Facility Advisory Committee and helped co-found the web-based organization known as the New Hampshire Pipeline Awareness.org. She's married to John McGee and has 4 grown children, 9 grandchildren, and 1 great-grandchild. Oh my goodness. And she sang professionally throughout the 70s, 80s, and 90s, and hopefully she'll sing for us today. So welcome, Kat. We're also pleased to have with us today Don Kreese, the Consumer Advocate of the New Hampshire Office of the Consumer Advocate. As Consumer Advocate, Don is tasked with representing the interests of the Granite State's residential utility customers at the New Hampshire Public Utilities Commission and elsewhere. Outside of the office, he is the chair of the Board of Trustees of We Own It, a nonprofit dedicated to the reform of cooperatives, and that strikes right to my heart as a former chairman of the New Hampshire Electric Cooperative. Go Don. He serves also on the board of the Northern New England chapter of the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and is also a columnist on the news site indepthnewhampshire.org. And if you follow indepthnewhampshire.org, I'm always looking forward to his columns. Always good stuff. Last but not least, we have Bob Backus, who is now retired from the law firm of Backus, Meyer and Branch. And Bob is the former chairman of the New Hampshire House Science, Technology, and Energy Committee. So we welcome Bob. Bob, if you have anything else to add to your CV in terms of background, could you tell us that? Go ahead.
No, that's fine, Joe. I have a long history on energy policy in the state, as many of you know, and I'm so pleased to see this organization come together and see so many of my colleagues now previously serving on the committee with me as part of it. So I'm looking forward to it.
Great. Glad to have you with us. And thank you all for agreeing to be with us this morning. Before we start our conversation, I ask that all Summit attendees mute your computer and put your screens on speaker view. If you have any questions for the panel, please pose them on chat, and we will do our best to bring those to the panel. I'll pose some questions to the panel and ask each panelist to give their thoughts on the question, and I will encourage debate among the panel. I'm sure we'll have a robust and interesting conversation. So it looks like with this group, we'll probably go till about 10:55, and let's start. Let's open the panel with the following question. I'll pose the first one. Why has New Hampshire consistently lagged behind the other New England states in the areas of energy efficiency, clean energy deployment, and carbon emissions reduction? Currently, New Hampshire is ranked 18th by the ACEEE and behind all the other New England states. Just our neighbor to the south, Massachusetts, is number 2 on that list. And we're also finding that in the last year, our triennial energy efficiency plan, which was due to be approved by the PUC in January, was sidelined and has been delayed. And now we're learning that the PUC is reopening the docket on that energy efficiency plan, likely further delaying the implementation of that plan. So this probably goes right to the heart of some of the things that Don Kreese has been doing. So Don, why don't we open it up for you and give us your thoughts on this perplexing question?
Ratepayer-funded energy efficiency, I think, is the most valuable thing that I can deliver to residential customers in my capacity as consumer advocate. So it's my top priority, and I fight like the dickens to try to make sure that we deliver as much of that as possible. And Joe, as you pointed out, that even though we're number 18 in the country, which puts us in the upper third of states, we are dead last in New England, and any state in a part of the country that is as cold as ours is, and gets us hot in the summer and is as far away from sources of fossil fuel as we are, really needs to be extremely aggressive about energy efficiency. And it's really important and valuable because apart from the climate implications, it saves customers money in the long run. And yet there is a great deal of ideological opposition to energy efficiency. I got asked in the chat whether I consider it a subsidy, and I do consider it a subsidy, but the world of network service by utilities is rife with subsidies, and many of them are appropriate, and this one is. You suggested that the PUC has reopened its energy efficiency docket. That docket has been open all along. We were expecting a decision in December about the 3-year energy efficiency plan that was supposed to launch on January 1. And the PUC simply refused to take action all the way until September 1st, when they put out a very disturbing order suggesting that they were going to let the new PUC commissioner pose some questions, and then he would get to ask some more questions at a hearing. I am not sitting or standing for any of that, because as far as I'm concerned, as a matter of due process, we conducted a full-blown administrative hearing at the PUC. There was really no opposition among the parties to the energy efficiency plan. So as far as I'm concerned, as a matter of law, the ratepayers of this state are entitled to an order approving that plan. And if I don't get an order approving that plan, I intend to take this problem straight to the New Hampshire Supreme Court.
Thanks, Don. I'll be right there with you, right in the Supreme Court. Kat, can we go to you? What are your thoughts on where we are in those 3 areas of clean energy, energy efficiency, and carbon reduction?
Well, I think if we relate back to the presentation we just had from Representative Blume, she started off her presentation saying that they had referenced some of the good work that had been done in New Hampshire to launch where they went with their initiative in terms of looking at climate change and its effect to their coastlines. New Hampshire has a really strong history of pulling together almost always volunteer expertise onto committees and commissions in order to address larger systemic problems. And the same has been true for climate over the years. In the last 4 years, or basically the length of the current administration to 2017, I guess, we have taken a sharp turn away from following the plans that have been put in place in the past. We had some very good work done on climate planning, starting in the early 2000s, and then with a plan in 2009 and a plan in 2014, all of which were well done. And to Representative Blume's point, states look at other states for, what's happening, how are we moving, what legislation will help us get where we want to go. We had systemic approaches. We had experts from different sectors contributing, and that's when New Hampshire does its best work. I can say that since I joined the legislature and started sitting on science, technology, and energy, we have been thwarted in those efforts. The governor, famously had 57 vetoes or so during the Democratic-led session. Many of those were climate bills. And some of the initiatives that Representative Blume talked about folks taking in Maine, we had tried during the Democratic majority. We tried to get a bill that would have the New Hampshire fleet of vehicles converted on their regular transition schedule, right? So we're going to be spending money to replace vehicles anyway, let's make them electric. And we gave a 20-year period. So there really would be no significant economic impact. It would just be a smart thing to do, lead by example, convert your fleet between 2019 and 2039, vetoed. John Mann, who the folks who've served in the legislature in the past know quite well, he still sits on science, technology, and energy. Several of our Democratic colleagues did not make it because it was kind of a wave election in 2020. But John Mann has been dedicated to energy efficiency for his entire, career with the legislature. And in that same session, he put in HB 80. In this session, he put in HB 80, but there was a similar bill that was vetoed in the last session that basically said, we put $1 out of whatever the amount of the payback is from Reggie for, it's a cap and trade program, right? So the amount of the money that comes in changes. At the time that we had the last assessment, I think it was $7 or something, but they're only allowing $1 of that money, which is supposed to be dedicated for energy efficiency, to go to energy efficiency. So there's always a limitation on what we can do, what we can invest in, and how we can use that money. And that money has been growing. So in the last auction that they had, we were getting typically about $14 million at auction as a state from Reggie. And it was 21 million, but we still only get $1 that goes to energy efficiency. So there's not any systemic management of the resources coming into the state. There's just, as Dawn mentioned, an ideology that we don't want to spend any money. And so cut off your nose to spite your face. There will be no strategy. There will be no discussion about the cost benefit analysis of investing those dollars and getting 4 back for every one you spend. So we're not having the kind of healthy debate that you would have if we were all honest brokers trying to solve a problem. And that's been my sort of biggest disappointment in coming to work on this. I also wanted to say just one other thing about my bio. I was a professional singer, but I also was a program manager in software engineering. And the skills that I bring to science and tech have more to do with, technology, and then a desire to make sure that we make good energy decisions so that our economy can move forward like everyone else's is going to. The chair of our committee told us this year in session, when we were trying again to move forward with allowing EV vehicles to come to dealerships in New Hampshire. We're the donut hole in New England. We don't allow that. That bill, defeated a second time, came from Representative McWilliams from Concord, and she's a wonderful, she's an attorney as well as an architect, and she has been responsible for putting in housing bills that increase housing efficiency. And she's also been really forward on trying to get us transitioning in small ways to accepting electric vehicles and the electrification of the transportation sector. None of that has been allowed to go forward. So it's not for lack of trying. It's more that we actually need to have a majority in order to get anything done. And we need to change leadership at the top, because it's been a major impediment to, we don't have a strategy by design. That's the way I would say it. I'll just leave it at that.
Thanks, Kat. I just might add that our legislature essentially killed any involvement that our environmental agency will have in the Transportation Climate Initiative. And, I use the old analogy that if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. And I think like the Reggie developments, if New Hampshire hadn't been at the table, New Hampshire probably would have gotten a much leaner share of the auction proceeds under Reggie. Also, I'm just surprised that our legislature's conservative bent. They should be concerned about the economics. Everything that they have turned down in terms of moving towards more energy efficiency, climate change, clean energy, would make us more competitive with our other New England sister states. And what they've done is made us less competitive. So I'd like to move on to Bob. Bob, what are your thoughts on this question about energy efficiency, clean energy, and carbon emissions?
Oh, thanks, Joe, and thanks for including me on this panel. I'd like to really acknowledge the excellent work that, well, Kat's doing, and especially and equally, I would say, Don Kreese. As he mentioned, there was a settlement agreement approved by all the parties to the docket to move forward with an increase in our goals for energy efficiency. And when there's a settlement agreement, it's normally pretty pro forma. Well, I didn't say pro forma, but it normally occurs that the commission is going to approve it and not go to a contested hearing. And Don pulled together every stakeholder in this, including representative of all the 4 incumbent utilities, the environmental organizations, even the Business and Industry Association, which has since changed its mind. And they came up with this agreement and presented to the commission. The commission decided it by not deciding it. So that's just dreadful. And it's through no lack of skilled work on behalf of our able consumer advocate. Now, many years ago, when I was involved in the fight over the licensing of Seabrook, there was a National Geographic article specifically on New Hampshire, and I worked with the authors on part of it because they did deal with the Seabrook issue. And the subtitle of that article was New Hampshire Contrarian. I always thought it was a pretty good description of our state, the contrarian state. And I just don't understand really why we're not willing to move forward on this. I do have a suggestion, though, and I've made this, many people have heard me say this before. In New Hampshire, everybody talks about the electric rates are too high. Well, it turns out the electric rates in New Hampshire are not extremely high compared to the rest of New England. They're sort of in the middle, maybe just below the middle of the average for the New England states, which is the real relevant comparison. Of course, they're somewhat higher than many other parts of the state. We don't have a TVA up here, for example, to provide hydropower without having to pay anybody dividends for doing it and not having to pay taxes. We don't have that. We do have, Joe, as you know, a very fine electric cooperative. But I think, and I've mentioned this many times, I'm going to have to mention again, I think the language you use is very, very important. In this state, we've got used to talking about electric ratepayers. We have to protect electric ratepayers from higher electric rates. Well, we really don't, because people don't pay rates, they pay bills. And it just bothers me that in our language, we always refer to ratepayers, and then the opposition party tends to think that any increase authorized by the government, whether it funds that operates as a government or some other purpose, can be called a tax. So they get into that language. And I think if we can begin to think about every time we hear a discussion about this, well, wait a minute, we don't really care about the rates, do we, if our bills are lower? And how do we get our bills lower? Well, as Don Kreese so ably advocates, and Kat too, and many others of you, you get them lower by reducing your usage, not by doing without, not by, freezing in the winter, or, not using air conditioning in the summer. You get at it by using more efficiency. And we've got a lot of that to be developed. And every dollar, I've seen studies that suggest every dollar you put in energy efficiency has a, $4 or $5 return value. And it usually comes about quite quickly. So, that's just my suggestion. We all try and remember and get that discussion going with people. Because when people hear that, they say, yeah, that's right. I don't pay rates. I pay a bill. I would like my bill to be lower, and I won't care that much if my rate's up, if my bill goes down because I'm using electricity because we had robust energy efficiency programs. Well, that's my thought on that.
Thank you, Don. I'm also, having been on the board of the New Hampshire Electric Co-op, even with the co-op, it was difficult to get staff to think about what's a concept called on-bill financing, where it's a pay-as-you-save account. So where the utility or state government would actually finance the energy efficiency improvements, and those improvements would be paid back to the funding party on a lowered electric bill each month. And it seemed like a great promise and premise, but we can't seem to get that happening in the state either. But okay, thanks. Appreciate it very much, Bob. Moving on, another question I've got. How can we as citizens in New Hampshire contribute to making up some of these gaps in performance? What can we actually do, given the state of the legislature and the governor's office and the executive council? So let's start with Kat this time.
Yeah, I am a person who really looked forward to working across the aisle, and I know in my town, we're all the jobs in the town, all the volunteer boards, the Board of Selectmen, they're nonpartisan jobs, right? No one asks you what your politics are. You step up and serve as a citizen. And I expected a similar experience going into the legislature. But at this point, I think we have to vote the bums out because we have a party that is not operating always in good faith. And I actually, I brought this up because one of the reasons I wanted to serve was really not to serve a party or an ideology, but I want to get things done. I thought I could help. I thought I had skills that could help make things easier for people to understand things that are complex. I thought some of the skills that I have would be useful. And what I'm finding is that this recalcitrance and this head in the sand kind of position that electric vehicles are a fad, or climate change isn't real. It's so pervasive that it's very hard to find partners, and for even the small things, let alone to get anything strategic happening at a time when we're behind on getting that strategy in place. So we have had bills that have asked for climate planning, climate targets, and they've all been shelved and killed. And then the smaller pieces that we're trying to do, whether they're around energy efficiency. For example, we did pass the Community Power Bill, HB 315, wonderful. We also had SB 91. They moved the ball along statutorily. But what is happening also legislatively under the majority that's in now, the GOP-led majority, is that there are bills being passed that also punch holes in the strategies that those bills support. So my community power the Hollis Energy Committee, so the town committee on energy in my town, had a meeting Thursday night to inform the public about community power. We're planning to join the Community Power Coalition. We've always been very forward on our planning in town. And two things directly affect us, two important things. One is a bill that's advancing, that was advancing. We actually did just kill it in subcommittee the other day, thank goodness. We got Troy Murner, who some of you know, who oftentimes will, if it's good for the North Country, he is a Republican that will cross the aisle in his vote. We had a bill that took away useful thermal credits, and our town converted multiple town buildings to pellet from oil. And so, people are making real investments around the state based on advances that we've made in the past. And these folks are like arsonists. They're taking away how the system is intended to work, so it breaks, so that the clean energy economy in terms of jobs, companies, support for, like, ultra geothermal is our largest ground source heat company in the state. They should be booming at this point. They're having trouble finding people, hiring people, training people, keeping people, and also servicing the customers that they already have. We're among their customers. So what we have to understand is that if we want any type of strategy, we have to change not only the leadership in the governor's office, we have to just change it all the way down, because we're not going, and I'm not saying that because of my political leanings. I'm saying that because the results that you get, you won't get the results. And the one other bill that I wanted to mention is, I was on the subcommittee that killed the useful thermal credits bill that would be damaging. But then I went downstairs to Ways and Means because they had two of our other bills that were being heard, and our Chairman Bose, was presenting them. And the first one was, and he had an amendment that no one had seen that passed in Ways and Means, because they want to defer to him as the leader of science, technology, and energy. The bill had originally been that municipalities can opt out of paying compliance with the renewable portfolio standard. And that money from municipalities goes to support the renewable portfolio standards. So that means when folks want to apply for grants, there's money available. So the opt-out was, scary, because it means that a lot of people would be taking their ball and going home at a time when, money is drying up for doing the things we want to do. So it's kind of a starve the beast strategy. And that amendment that he brought in changed it from opt-out to opt-in, which is even worse because it means everybody is going to stop paying unless they decide that they want to pay for it, which is pretty bad. So I think it's very difficult to explain to people how much destructive work is going on to the building blocks that we've already put in place. But I am anticipating, and I haven't gone into bill review because yesterday was we had 1 week to put bills in. I don't think folks on our committee have been very ambitious in what we've filed because we know what we're up against. But I'm concerned that next year is going to be even worse. It sounds pretty bleak, and I don't, but I guess my answer is elections have consequences. It matters who you put in charge. You will not get the solutions that you are seeking if you don't work to change the leadership and the majorities so that we can pass the legislation we need to move forward. And also, one last thing I'll say, I've been very involved in framing and messaging, and Bob just mentioned, how we talk about things and how we lose that battle often. That is one thing I hope that this network would be able to do as an echo chamber, is that we could figure out perhaps some framing and messaging on the destruction that's happening. We need to let the public understand that what's happening isn't good for the state or good for the environment or good for the economy. Those are messages that resonate, but people are not aware. And that's one of the reasons that I was hoping that this group could be formed and could be utilized, is to relay those messages down to communities. Because I think there's going to be a wave the next way in 2022, but only if we, let people know.
Thanks, Kat. One observation I had was this past session of the legislature, I went into it very pessimistic that we're going to have any success, but I think we had some successes. House Bill 315 started as a very regressive community power bill, ended up being actually a very positive power bill due to the pressure from outside folks, and so that was good. We also saw a lot of I'll call them stinky bills that ended up being retained in committee or outright killed. So I think we had some success, but we also had some failures. But I think we did better than I thought we would last year. But I'm keeping my fingers crossed for this session of the legislature. Bob, can we go to you? What are your thoughts on how citizens can actually make up for these gaps in our performance of energy efficiency, climate change, carbon emissions reduction?
Well, these are all very important things. And as Kat mentioned, I think one of the things that happened in the default of state leadership on this at the highest levels, we did with some, you mentioned it, Joe, House Bill 315, where I think Cliff Below was really key into getting Chairman Vos to change that bill into something that enabled our municipalities to move forward. And that's where it's got to be done until we have until we get back, frankly, a better House and even a better Senate, and may I say somebody different in the corner office as well. And it's really exciting to see the number of communities that are grabbing onto this as a way to enable you to do this at the municipal level. So I think that's very important. And the other thing is, I just saw the post from Howard Moffett on the chat, and I certainly agree. We've got to have better results in our elections if we're going to have better results in our energy policy. New Hampshire. I was inquiring at the EC board meeting about the status of RGGI, which is turned out to be I guess one of the first cap and trade programs. It's a way to address climate pollution, nothing like what John Gage wants to do, which would be far more efficient carbon fee and dividend, but it is a way to move forward. The thing has been expanding with new states joining it, not just the original 9. And what do we got in New Hampshire? We've got a conditional repeal. If one of the other major New England states dropped out, then we would automatically drop out. even though we know that if we dropped out, we would still have to pay some of the cost to run the system, but we'd get none of the benefits. But we still have to, hang on by the skin of our teeth just to save that program, modest as it is. So we certainly need to get strong candidates. I hope some of the people here will become candidates and run and help us change things.
Thanks, Bob. Yeah, absolutely. We're finding ourselves in a situation where we really do need to really improve the candidate pool going into the selections in 2022. Don, can I turn to you now on this particular question?
Yes, you can.
Thank you.
I'm a state employee, and for that and other reasons, I have to be really careful about how I answer a question like this. I do not disdain partisan politics at all. It has a vital role to play in our polity, but I have to be adjacent to partisan politics, not part of it. I try to maintain excellent relations with folks in both caucuses. I consider Michael Vose, who is Bob Backus's successor as chair of the House Science, Tech, and Energy Committee, to be a friend. And so I'm going to try to be really measured. One of the things that Kat McGee didn't say about herself is that she is a remarkably skilled legislator. Just like Representative Vose is. Representative Vose, I've watched him for quite a few years now. He plays the legislative game to win. And on the Democratic side of the House ST&E committee, you have 4 really remarkable women currently serving on that committee. You have Kat McGee, you have Lee Oxenham, you have Rebecca McWilliams, who I know is here, and you also have Representative Cretion, and I think they've been marginalized in a way that I find worrisome and disturbing. So Jackie Cretion, I spaced on her first name temporarily. I guess my message is that it is important not just to elect people who have the policy preferences that you care about. It's important to elect and empower people who are going to go to the State House in Concord and play the game to win. If you want your policy objectives to actually become enshrined in bills that get to the governor for his signature or veto, that's vitally important. The other answer I have to this question of, well, what can citizens do is citizens can participate in proceedings before the Public Utilities Commission right alongside me. There was a question in the chat from John Chafee about forcing the PUC to consider environmental impacts of its decisions. And his question was, well, could we have a bill that says, hey, PUC, you have to do that? And my answer is the PUC already has to do that. As John will remember from a few years ago, the PUC made a decision that had to do with the request of Liberty Utilities to expand its natural gas franchise territory into the Upper Valley. And it said in its decision, well, we're not an environmental regulator. We don't think about that. We don't care about that. It's none of our business. Well, in my opinion, and I am a lawyer, and I used to be the general counsel of the PUC, that was legal error. And somebody could make that argument again in an appropriate case at the PUC and then appeal that to the New Hampshire Supreme Court. And I think they'd have a good shot at winning. And then here's my last point, and here is where I might annoy some of you. I think too much time has been spent and too much blood and ink have been spilled over the last 5 years about net metering. The solar industry, for obvious reasons, thinks net metering is the most important thing that any of us can do. But from my standpoint as the state's ratepayer advocate, it is not in first place, not in second place. It might be in about fourth place when it comes to priorities about making our utility or our energy use better, more reliable, cheaper, and having fewer environmental externalities. So as I said earlier, energy efficiency, I think, is the most important thing. Negawatts have almost no, in fact, virtually no carbon impacts. And so I think it's time to put net metering to one side and focus on some of the other outrageous things that are going on, including a whole bunch of cases that the PUC is refusing to decide.
Thanks, Don. Your last point about priorities that are greater than solar, I don't disagree with you. In fact, I think one thing the state is missing is in terms of getting ready for the revolution within the electric utility industry, whether it be solar. Go ahead.
Well,
Sorry.
I just want to clarify.
Please.
I do think solar is important.
Yep.
And Joe, as you know, the electric co-op put in a giant solar array in Molten Borough. I thought that was great.
Right.
And, you know, I'm sad because I spend time in Vermont, and Vermont, the countryside is just littered with big solar arrays. And, you know, we should have them in New Hampshire too. But that's different than net metering, I think.
Yep. Yep. No, I think that one of the things we're missing in this state is getting ready for the revolution that will be occurring within the utility industry. Right now, whether it's energy efficiency, whether it's demand response processes where people actually reduce their demand at the point of use, whether it's, again, energy efficiency, additional clean energy resources on the grid. Right now, our grid, in its basic form, was invented by Nikola Tesla. And all the components he put in place are still working for us today. So we're working with a utility system with maybe a little few computers thrown in that was designed almost 100 years ago. So we need to really also make progress on modernizing the grid so that we're ready for what's to come in the future.
Exactly, Joe. That is more important than whether we're going to pay 33 cents a kilowatt hour for net metered electricity.
Absolutely. And just the distribution system itself can be improved because we lose 3 to 6% of the power we put in doesn't come out the other end. It's lost in resistant losses, and that can be improved. And there's no incentives now for that to take place. So next question. This will be we'll start with Bob. Is there any prospect, if any, for meaningful legislation this year on net metering, grid modernization, holding the line on the RPS standard, or any of those legislation like that? What do you think?
Well, I think that question really should go to Kat because she's in the legislature this year and I'm not. And I think she kind of answered that question when she said that the committee minority is not working on a lot of bills because they know that they've got real tough sledding with these bills. And there's been a bunch of retained bills that they'll have to deal with too. So I'll be quick on this one, and I'll let you turn it over to Kat or Dawn as you prefer.
I'm trying to sequence through the speaker so everybody gets a chance.
I understand that. I appreciate it.
So Don, I think I know what you're going to say, but go ahead and say it.
Okay, well, let me see if I can surprise you then, Joe.
Please.
I think the key, and Kat kind of said this before, the key is look at the way House Bill 315 went down. That was a horrible bill because it was drafted by Eversource. Eversource took the bill draft, handed it to Representative Vose and said, please introduce this. And he did. But the bill that emerged at the other end, which has to do with community power aggregation, was actually an okay bill.
Sure.
And I think the key to that was Cliff Below. And Cliff Below's method of operation, and he's done this for decades now, is he is relentless. I mean, Cliff just doesn't go away. And he's not rude. He's just incredibly persistent. So he will just keep pressing people like Representative Vose with information and advocacy until Representative Vose, in effect, cries uncle. And I think that is the key to success when it comes to climate favorable legislation in the current legislature. And I think the other thing to keep in mind is that, and I'm trying to stay nonpartisan here. The other thing to keep in mind is that we have a bicameral legislature. So there is a Senate. And even if you are a rabid Democrat who bleeds totally green, there are members of the state Senate who will listen to your arguments and take them into account. You know, you guys can name them as well as I can. But
Hmm.
I just think we have to remember that ST&E on the House side is very important, but it's not the only game in town.
Right, absolutely. And Kat, your turn.
Yeah, not the only game in town here.
Let's see.
Yeah, I had a whole bunch of different thoughts, but what we started saying is that we are not heavily ambitious for the next sector. The next session rather. So all our bills were put in by yesterday. All our LSRs will be coming out. We'll be able to modify them before we start the session again in January. But I didn't mean to indicate that we're not filing bills, because, you know, we are filing bills on a lot of significant things. And to Dawn's point, community power was, you know, an exception where we worked the process. And I think Cliff's response, I think the clean energy sector's response when they saw what Eversource had put in HB 315 was hell no. So that was the hell no response. They came out hard and looked at the bills that were coming in the year and said, you know, these are our priorities. We need to work like hell on these to make sure that they are improved if they're going to go through, or stopped. And I think there is an acknowledgement, and we do have folks on the Republican side who are energy conscious legislators or more moderate legislators that we can work with when bills go through the House, because it's a very small majority that the GOP have now. And just this week, it was splashed all over media that Dr. William Marsh became a Democrat and has joined our caucus because of the anti-vaccine and the anti-mask folks. He just couldn't take it anymore. He was demoted from his job as a vice chair, so on Department of Health and Human Services, or on HHS, tongue twister, in the House. So, so I think, you know, there's starting to be a little bit of a chasm there, and energy and the economy and the environment are still issues that resonate with some of these representatives. They're not always going to be in lockstep with a party position that says we can keep ignoring it and just yell taxes, and that's going to be okay with the people of New Hampshire. I did want to say one thing about a bill that Dawn and I worked on, and that Bob assigned me to the subcommittee on way back when in my first session in 2019, the statewide energy data platform, or what we call the data hub, the energy data hub, which passed and in the House and Senate and got signed into law. And then part of that law was saying that there had to be an adjudicative proceeding at the PUC to determine how it would go forward and if it should go forward. And all of that went through to a settlement agreement. So the wheels of how big things get done, they do turn, and they do slowly turn in favor of progress. When you talk about time of use, demand, energy efficiency, things we can manage those things better if we can see them. And so in a data age, in an information age, New Hampshire still is leading, because we had a stakeholder process with people in the state, people out of the state that were interested in seeing states get faster and better at managing their energy. It was a fascinating process. It was an excellent process. The utilities were involved. Everybody was singing the praises of this thing when we went to the two then PUC commissioners, one of whom has left and been replaced. So we still have only 2 commissioners out of 3, and we are still waiting for some kind of response on that. The reason I bring it up is this is a critical linchpin to the state being able to advance its energy future. And Dawn and I and others are going to be speaking on a panel at the local energy solutions conference that Clean Energy puts on October 8th, little plug. But that could easily be killed by this newly forming Department of Energy, which is mostly, any of the announcements around the Department of Energy have been political appointees, people with no background in energy or environmental. So lots of concerns about the reformulating PUC, the reformulating site evaluation committee, which Michael Vose just announced the other day in a meeting, is going through a significant reorg. And I'm like, how does he know that? So there's a lot of gamesmanship going on and marginalizing of people who actually are qualified for those jobs. So I wanted to put that out to this group because it's contextualizing around what is actually happening in the government that will create impediments, stonewalling, and much like what the cigarette industry did, if they stall progress, any progress delayed is profit improved. I just made that up, but that's the way I look at it.
I'll write that down.
Yeah. So that is my concern, is that there is an element of that also happening. It is by design that we're not getting somewhere and that people are being put in place. The legislation in HB2 that reconstituted a Department of Energy that had been eliminated, held at bay, turned into a little teeny department that didn't do anything on climate, that was putting out 10-year energy strategies that also didn't really talk at all about climate. The Department of Energy also is being constituted without any mission or mandate or discussion of climate. So that is what you have to understand about the non-strategic elements in our government. There's nobody to go to. And that was the reason that Bob chaired a commission to look at, do we need a Department of Energy? The governor's people at the time that were on that commission came back and said, nope, nothing to see here. We do not need a Department of Energy. Then the following year, they shoved it in the budget and said, now we're going to have a Department of Energy. And each time these things happen, each time there's been a move by this governor to do climate kabuki, there's no mention of climate. There's no urgency. There's no goals. So as long as we're in that situation, you're not going to see anything substantive or real. And so that is my concern for, Don and I talk about this all the time, the statewide energy data platform. He's like, well, the governor signed it, so he's probably going to be supportive of it. I'm like, well,
oh, you naive kid, Don. You know, Kat, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but the only piece of that you omitted that you really shouldn't be allowed to omit is I drafted the original data platform bill. I had Martha Fuller Clark introduce it when she was in the Senate, and I watched that bill die what looked like to me like a slow, painful death on the House side. And what saved it is Bob Backus, visionary guy that he is, had the audacity to take a freshman legislator, Kat McGee, and put her in charge of the subcommittee that was going to wrestle with that bill. And Kat, in part by baking muffins and presenting them at a strategic juncture, like she saved that bill from oblivion. And now we're going to get that data platform if it kills me. Now, you can't see data like you can see the solar panels on your roof or your backyard, but it's really important. And it is through the skilled legislating of Kat McGee that we're going to get there, because she is the hero of that story.
Oh, that is very,
Kat.
very sweet. That is very sweet. I think the way I try to say it in a nutshell is you can't manage what you can't measure. And if we want to get somewhere quickly, leveraging the local control model that is popular in New Hampshire, then we're able to move forward by saying, we are going to have a distributed model whereby you can have self-determination around how efficient your house, your plant, your municipality is, right? We're going to give that to the people. And I think one of the things that was envisioned, which is kind of cool, is if we create a standard around how the data comes in, then any new technology that comes along can also feed its data in. So it will just be energy data. So it will be agnostic, and you'll be able to roll it up and look at it and manage it. And that can have incredible impacts on how quickly New Hampshire could move forward. And a lot of other states were looking at what we were doing. And we did have a man who stayed with the whole process, Michael Murray from out of state, who had experience in other states. And he actually testified in the settlement hearing with the PUC that the process that New Hampshire underwent was the right way to do it, and that we were more thoughtful than any other groups he had worked with at coming to basically a set of requirements that we could hand off to build the thing. So it was an excellent process, and I am very worried that the people who are now going to be in charge of it have no insights as to how it was arrived at, and no investment in the fact that it would be of value to New Hampshire. So I'm just worried about the thinking of the people who have that platform's fate in their hands.
Right. Well, Kat, I think data is everything. And I think also we're falling behind the rest of the states in terms of data from the customer level to the utility level in terms of having basically smart meters.
Yeah.
I know there's been lots of controversy about the cost and what they actually provide, but they actually give the data not only to the customer, but to the utility of the operating company in terms of how to manage the platform and their utilities distribution system in the most efficient way possible, and sets us up for the future much better.
So I just want to say, with respect to the data platform, because there's a question in the chat about it, this is one of the 3 big dockets that the PUC has refused to act on. There is a settlement agreement that allows that data platform project to move forward to its next stage of development, but the PUC has refused to act. It's refused to act on that. It's refused to act on grid modernization, and it has refused to act on the triennial energy efficiency plan. This is a regulatory fiasco and scandal, and really people should be marching on the Bastille with torches and pitchforks. Seriously.
Bob, go ahead.
Can I just add one thing? As Kat reminds us, we need to see how this bill establishing the creation of a data platform, how that's actually going to be implemented. Same goes for the new Department of Energy. I was an advocate of setting up a Department of Energy, and my principal reason is I saw the PUC was not really interested in enforcing the goals and policy goals we have already established by legislature for, energy efficiency and renewable energy. They just didn't want to put much weight on that in any of the things they were deciding. So it seemed to me that if we had a Department of Energy, that could be an agency that could be an advocacy for this. And, we still don't have a commissioner nominated to be the head of that department. So that's really something to watch out for. And there's some excellent candidates among this group we have right here. And I think, I understand a lawyer I know and Don knows named Tony Roisman just decided to throw his name in by sending a resume to the governor of Vermont. And he got appointed. So, I think we should use the considerable tool that you've given us, Joe. And I particularly want to thank Donna and Susan for all the hard work they've done to put this together and provide us with this tool we've got, and we should definitely use it. And there's one place you might do it. And by the way, the new energy strategy, the last edition of it was a total fiasco, total disaster, is being updated. There are going to be comment periods. I'm sure lots of us are going to weigh in on that. Last time they didn't pay much attention to the comments, or the vast majority of them. It's still worth doing.
The governor asked for resumes at the executive council meeting last Wednesday. He is having trouble finding an energy commissioner. And yet there are, as Bob just said, lots of qualified people who are right here in this very meeting. One idea might be to appoint Joe Kwasnick, the shadow energy commissioner.
Are you trying, Don, are you trying to destroy my marriage? I don't know what you're doing there, but I think we need to close up this discussion. Thank you all. I actually have one more question. How do we get people like the BIA and industry to start to support these measures? It would seem to me that it would be in their best interest to really support a thriving energy community within the state of New Hampshire. Bob, what do you think?
Well, I think, we do have a progressive business group to support good energy policies. They don't seem to have anywhere near the clout that the BIA does, which is unfortunate. But I think if businessmen who are running progressive entities, and we have many excellent ones in New Hampshire, you can name them as well as I can. We have some very fine companies that are doing an excellent job in their own energy efficiency programs. and getting on with renewables. If those people could be urged to get active with the BIA and asked to be appointed to their energy committee, maybe we could turn this around. So we wouldn't have the BIA being the constant ultimate opposition of so many of these things. And as I say, it should be energy efficiency is good for all customers. It reduces your use and reduces your bills. So it should be an easy argument to make. And that's my suggestion.
If you're worried about the BIA, and you should be, don't let the state's utilities off the hook. They occupy key positions on the BIA executive committee of the board of directors. And, the utilities, when I talk to them, they're all like, oh, Don, we love energy efficiency. We're doing such a good job deploying it. But I think they have the ability to force the BIA to adopt a more enlightened attitude about energy initiatives. And I think it speaks volumes that they aren't succeeding in doing that. And the BIA is about to appoint a new executive director. So this is a pretty key juncture there.
All good comments. I'm afraid we'll have to close out this session. I am absolutely overwhelmed with the conversation that happened today, not only among our panelists, but also the questions coming in from our audience. So thank you so much, panelists, for coming aboard today. And thank you to our attendees today for the wonderful questions. So I think we're going to be
Commissioner Kwasnick.
Thank you for doing this.
Oh my God. I'm getting myself into big trouble here. I think what we're going to move on to now is a 10-minute break. So,
Yes, we are.
So
yeah, thank you, Joe.
Go ahead, Jen.
Thank you, Joe, so much for moderating this incredible panel discussion. It was so interesting. So I just thank all the panelists for participating today.